I was 13 when they left me, standing on the front porch with a plastic bag of clothes clutched tightly in my hands. My parents didn't even look back as they packed their car with all their belongings, leaving behind a life they had promised to me. My mother's cold eyes didn't flicker, her focus solely on the road ahead, as if I was nothing more than a passing inconvenience. My father, his back already turned, shot me one final line: "You're too much trouble. You'll figure it out." And then, the door slammed, and the engine roared to life, taking them away from me without a second thought. I stood there, the weight of abandonment sinking in, realizing that the two people who were supposed to care for me were gone. I was utterly alone. For weeks, the neighbors whispered. Some out of pity, some in judgment, but it was the quiet ones that hurt the most. They saw what was happening, but they didn't act. It was as if my pain was just another drama to observe, a story to talk about at dinner. A teacher tried to intervene, one who noticed I hadn't been showing up at school regularly. She slipped me sandwiches during lunch, pulling me aside and offering words of encouragement. But all I could do was nod and eat in silence, the hunger in my stomach a far cry from the emptiness in my heart. The local foster system did its job, placing me in various homes, but it never felt like home. I was just another file in a pile of abandoned children, another face passing through a system that could never replace what I had lost. The truth was hard to swallow. My parents had chosen their freedom over me, and nothing was going to change that. As I grew older, the pain of abandonment didn't fade. It was always there, a shadow lingering in the corners of my mind. But I had to learn to survive, to build a life on my own. I stopped hoping for their return, stopped waiting for the phone to ring with apologies or explanations that would never come. When I was 20, I finally found some peace in a man named Ethan. He was everything I had never had: kind, patient, and loving. Together, we built a life, a home where I believed I had found the safety I'd always longed for. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. A small house with peeling paint, a garden that barely grew, and the promise of better days ahead. Ethan made me believe in something again, in the possibility of family, in the power of love. But at 25, that fragile peace was shattered. Ethan died in a car accident, leaving me a widow with 2 young children to care for. The grief was suffocating, as if the air had been stolen from my lungs. But just when I thought I couldn't endure any more pain, my past returned to haunt me. My parents, the ones who had abandoned me, showed up at Ethan's funeral, as if they had the right to be there, as if they had any claim over me or my life. They didn't come to mourn. They came for something far worse: my inheritance. And in that moment, standing over my husband's grave, I knew my fight was far from over. After Ethan's funeral, everything felt like a blur. The weight of grief pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating, but I still had to keep going. There were bills to pay, children to feed, and a life to manage on my own. Hannah and Michael needed me, needed reassurance that the world wasn't as cruel as it seemed. But in the quiet moments, when I was alone, the emptiness hit me hardest. The house that once felt like a sanctuary now felt hollow, and I wondered how I would survive without Ethan by my side. Then, the first sign of the war ahead arrived. A thick envelope slid under the door. My heart sank as I tore it open. It was from a lawyer, a name I didn't recognize, but the words were all too familiar. My parents were suing me for Ethan's estate. They wanted the house we had built, the life we had made together, as if it had never been mine to keep. They had the audacity to claim their share, despite abandoning me when I was a child. I had nothing, no lawyer, no money to fight back, but I wasn't going to let them take everything from me. Not again. The weeks after receiving the summons were a blur of anger and determination. I had no lawyer, no one to guide me through this battle, but I had something else, something far stronger than money or legal expertise. I had the truth. I didn't know how yet, but I was determined to fight back. The thought of them, the people who had abandoned me when I needed them most, now trying to take everything I had built with Ethan, filled me with a rage I couldn't ignore. They had destroyed me once, they weren't going to do it again. I spent hours at the library, reading through everything I could find on inheritance laws, looking for any loophole, any advantage I could find. I had no formal education in law, but I was resourceful, and I knew this was a battle I couldn't afford to lose. When I wasn't reading, I was digging through old boxes in the attic, searching for any evidence that could expose my parents' lies. Photos, letters, anything that could prove they had been absent during my entire life. They had left me when I was a child, and now they wanted to reap the rewards of my husband's hard work. I wasn't going to let that happen. But as the days passed, I realized I couldn't just rely on the legal system to win this fight. I needed to make people see the truth, hear the truth. So I started reaching out to people who had known me back then, neighbors, teachers, old family friends. I spoke to the people who had witnessed my parents' abandonment firsthand. The ones who had watched as I struggled through my teenage years, shuffled between homes, with no one to call my own. And the more I heard their stories, the more I knew that my parents had underestimated me. They thought they could walk in with their polished suits and designer bags and just take what they wanted. But they didn't know how strong I had become in their absence. I didn't sleep much during those weeks. Every free moment was spent organizing my evidence, collecting witness statements, and preparing my own case. The whole process felt like a marathon, each step more exhausting than the last. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't let my children grow up thinking that people could treat you this way and get away with it. I had to be strong for them. Then, one afternoon, it happened. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a stack of papers when the doorbell rang. It was my parents, standing on the other side with their lawyer, grinning as if they had already won. The arrogance in their eyes made my blood boil. They didn't care about me, or Ethan, or the children. They cared only about the money. "Is this your idea of a joke?" my father sneered, holding up a paper. "You really think you can keep this from us?" I didn't respond at first, just stared at them, the fury in my chest threatening to spill over. My mother was standing behind him, her eyes scanning the house like it was something she had every right to claim. They thought they could intimidate me into giving up, into handing over everything I had worked for. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I had spent too many years building a life out of the wreckage they had left me. I had clawed my way through every hardship, and now, I was ready to stand tall and face them. "You're wasting your time," I said, my voice steady despite the rage boiling inside me. "This is my house. This is my life. You left me to fend for myself when I was 13. You don't get to come back and take everything I've worked for." My father's expression faltered for a second, but then he composed himself, the smug grin returning to his face. "We gave you life. We gave you a chance to survive. Now, it's time for you to pay us back." That was it. That was the moment I snapped. I knew right then that I wasn't just fighting for my inheritance. I was fighting for my dignity, for everything I had ever been forced to endure. They had no idea what they had unleashed by showing up at my door. The more they pushed, the more I knew I had to destroy their lies, expose them for the selfish, cruel people they were. I made a decision right there, standing in my kitchen, surrounded by my children and my parents' greed. I wasn't going to beg them for mercy. I wasn't going to give them anything. Instead, I would make them regret ever stepping foot into my life again. Over the next few days, I went into overdrive. The documents I had collected, the statements from neighbors, teachers, even social workers who had seen the neglect I suffered as a child, they would all be used against them. I wasn't going to let them walk into that courtroom and spin their lies without consequences. The truth would be my weapon. When the day of the hearing arrived, I felt an odd sense of calm. It wasn't that I wasn't nervous, of course I was. But I had already won. I had the evidence. I had the truth. I had the strength to face them. And more importantly, I had my children. That was what mattered. I walked into the courtroom with my head held high, my children by my side. I could feel my parents' eyes on me as I passed them, their sneers only fueling the fire inside me. The lawyer they had hired, a slick man in a sharp suit, was already standing at the front, waiting for the battle to begin. The hearing started, and I listened as their lawyer spoke. "Our clients have always been there for their daughter," he said, supporting her financially and emotionally throughout her life. I almost laughed out loud, but instead, I stood up, my voice steady and clear. "Your Honor, my parents abandoned me when I was 13. They left me to fend for myself, without a second thought. They never supported me. They never cared for me. They've come here today not out of love or concern, but for money. And I won't let them take what belongs to me." The room was silent for a moment as I continued, laying out every lie they had told, every piece of evidence I had gathered to expose their neglect. As I spoke, I could see the discomfort on my parents' faces. Their lawyer stammered, trying to refute my claims, but it was too late. The truth was already out there. By the time I finished, I knew I had won. It wasn't just the legal battle I had won, it was my life. I had finally taken control, and I wasn't going to let them destroy me again. I was stronger than I had ever been, and I wasn't backing down. The final hearing arrived with an almost surreal sense of finality. As I walked into the courtroom, I felt a strange mixture of fear and determination. The courtroom was far colder than I had anticipated, the harsh white lights overhead adding to the tension that clung to the air. My parents were seated across the room, looking so composed, so assured, that it almost made me doubt myself. Their lawyer stood beside them, confidently arranging his papers like he had already won. But I had come too far to falter now. I glanced at my children, sitting quietly beside me. Hannah, with her wide, innocent eyes, seemed to understand none of the gravity of the situation. Michael, too young to comprehend the full weight of the moment, squeezed my hand tightly, his little fingers giving me strength when I thought I might crumble. For them, I had to stand strong. They were my reason, my anchor, my everything. The judge entered, his sharp eyes scanning the room as silence fell. This was it. The moment that would decide everything. I couldn't afford to back down now. Their lawyer began with the same rehearsed arguments they had used before, how they had supported me throughout my life, how they had always been there when they hadn't. My skin crawled as I heard the lies spill from his mouth, the polished words he spoke as though they meant something real. But I was ready. I was prepared. When my turn came, I stood and took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. I could feel their eyes on me, but I didn't flinch. I was no longer the 13-year-old girl who had been abandoned, standing alone on a porch with nothing but a plastic bag of clothes and a broken heart. I was a woman, strong, determined, and ready to fight for everything I had built. "Your Honor," I began, my voice unwavering. "These people, my parents, abandoned me when I was 13. They walked away from me without a second thought. They left me to grow up in a world without love, without support. They didn't raise me. They didn't protect me. I had to learn to survive on my own." I could feel the murmurs ripple through the courtroom as I spoke. My voice grew louder, stronger. "I've spent my entire life fighting to survive, to build something that was mine, something worth keeping. And now, they have the audacity to come here, to take what little I have left, to claim it as their own, when they've never shown an ounce of care for me. They didn't raise me, they didn't love me, and they have no right to what my husband worked so hard for." The lawyer for my parents stood to object, but the judge raised a hand, silencing him. I could see my parents squirming in their seats now, their faces tight with anger and disbelief. The smug expressions that had once dominated their faces were now replaced with something darker. My mother's hand trembled slightly as she reached for a tissue, but I didn't look away. I wasn't backing down. I continued, pulling out the evidence I had meticulously gathered over the past weeks. I laid out the bank records, the school logs, the statements from neighbors and teachers, each piece of proof that exposed the lies they had told. "These are the facts," I said. "This is the truth. They claim to have supported me, but the records tell a different story. They were never there. They never helped. They abandoned me. And now they want to take from me what they never had the right to. The room grew tense as I watched my parents' lawyer stumble over his words, trying to refute what I was saying. But it was clear to everyone now, his arguments were crumbling. My parents had no leg to stand on. I turned to the judge, my heart pounding. Your Honor, I am not asking for sympathy. I am asking for justice. These people have no claim to what is mine. They had their chance, and they threw it away. They left me to survive on my own, and now, when they see me standing on my own 2 feet, they want to tear it all down. I won't let them. The judge sat in silence for a long moment, his gaze flicking between my parents and me. The room was still, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, he spoke. I've heard enough, the judge said, his voice firm. The plaintiffs have provided no credible evidence to support their claims. Their statements are unfounded and manipulative. I find in favor of the defendant. He slammed the gavel down, the sound echoing in the silent courtroom. I felt a rush of relief flood over me, but I didn't allow myself to show it. This wasn't about celebrating. This was about survival. This was about standing up for everything I had fought for. My parents sat frozen, disbelief etched across their faces. My mother's lips trembled as she stared at me, her face pale. My father's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, the shock of defeat settling over him. Lindsay, who had been smugly sitting in the front row, stared at me with wide eyes, her face burning with embarrassment. The whispers started immediately, rippling through the courtroom. She won. They abandoned her, and now look at them. I didn't feel the need to gloat. I didn't need to. I had won. The truth had prevailed, and that was all that mattered. I stood there for a moment, gathering my papers and my children's hands. We walked out of the courtroom, the whispers following us like a trail of ashes. I didn't look back. Not once. They had come for my life, for everything I had, but they had walked out with nothing. The sun was shining brightly outside, a stark contrast to the dark, oppressive atmosphere inside the courthouse. As I stepped into the light with Hannah and Michael by my side, I knew that this was the beginning of something new. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a survivor, and I had everything I needed to rebuild. I had done it. I had fought for my future, for my children's future, and I had won.